Today we're going to talk about something called a user-defined function inside PHP, and this is especially an important episode for you to watch because you will be using user-defined functions all the time when you code PHP code. So we talked about predetermined functions, which are functions that has already been made inside PHP, and we can just use it right now. We don't actually have to create it first, but a user-defined function is a function that we create that we can use later on inside our code. So to give you guys an example here, let's actually go ahead and write out a function, just the basic setup for a function, which is by writing function, parentheses, curly brackets, and this is the basic setup for a function. Now, there's a couple of things we need in here. First of all, we actually need to write something inside the curly brackets so we can actually tell the function to do something, and we need to give the function a name. So in our case, we can just go ahead and call this one, new calc with a big C, which is the name of the function. Now, when we call this function, it's going to do whatever is inside our parentheses, the curly brackets, which are in here. And for our example, we're going to go ahead and tell it that when we call the function, we want it to take a number that the user has defined, or maybe something we defined beforehand, and take 75% of it, and then echo out a string that says, here is 75% of what you wrote, and then it's going to tell us what the actual calculation is. So one thing I want to note out with functions is that it's very important. Well, it's not very important. You can easily, not follow this little rule here. But when you create functions yourself, you need to make sure that one function does one thing. So I've seen people, and I've done it myself in the past, where I have one function that does a whole bunch of, stuff all at once. Like, first of all, I would calculate 75%, echo it out, and then afterwards I would take the 75% and do something else with it, and suddenly I end up with this function that does a whole bunch of stuff, meaning that I can only use it one place inside my website. Now, a function is supposed to be something that you can use multiple times, many different places inside your website, so you avoid having to write the same code over and over again. So that's the whole idea behind functions, is that we don't want to write stuff over again all the time. So one function should do one thing, so it's possible to use the same function over and over again. So inside the curly brackets, we're going to go ahead and create a variable, which is going to be new number, I guess, equal to variable x multiplied by 0.75. which is going to give us 75% of whatever variable x is. Now, variable x, we haven't actually created yet, and we're just going to go ahead and create it right now. So on top of our function, we're going to say variable x is equal to, let's say, 100. So now what we're saying is that we want to take variable x, and when we call this function, then we want to do something with variable x. Now, underneath here, inside the curly brackets, we're going to go ahead and create an echo. That's going to echo out a string, which says here is 75% of what you wrote. Now we're just going to pretend here that the user did actually write what x was equal to. So after the echo, we of course need to include the actual variable we have up here, the new number that we created. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy it, paste it after the string with a punctuation between them. And now we have a function that simply takes, x and takes 75% and writes out, here's 75% of what you wrote. Now, we need to do one more thing, because right now, if I were to actually, use this function, it wouldn't actually work. Because we need to make sure we actually call the actual variable we're going to use inside the function. Now, it's important to note, you don't have to use, data outside the function. So we don't have to use like a variable that's outside the function. We could easily just say that this in here is 100 times 75, and then you can just call the function and it's going to calculate 75% of 100. Now, because I want to actually use a variable outside the function, we need to make sure inside the parentheses we write which data we're picking up from the outside of the function. Otherwise it doesn't know what variable x is. So inside the parentheses, we're going to write variable x. So now it's actually going to go looking for variable x outside the function. So now that we have this, we actually have the function created, but we haven't called the function yet. If I actually go into my browser, refresh, you guys can see we have nothing. And that's because we just created a function. We need to call it as well, just like we would with any other kind of predetermined functions inside PHP. So underneath here, we're just going to go ahead and call out this function. So I'm going to go ahead and say new calc parentheses semicolon. So now if I actually go to the browser, you guys can see we do actually get a warning here. Okay, yeah, I know why we get the warning. Inside, when we call the function, we also need to make sure we do actually include variable x, because you need to pretend like we're calling this part up here. Because variable x is inside the parentheses, we also need to put it inside a new calc function we actually call down here, because otherwise it doesn't know, when to pick up variable x. Now, the cool thing about functions is that right now I do actually have variable x on top of my written out function here, but you can put variable x any way you want as long as it comes before when you actually call the function down here. Because right now we don't know what variable x is at the moment when we actually create the function, but at some point, much later in the code, when we do actually decide, okay, this is what variable x is, and now I want to call out new calculation, we can just simply write this piece of code down here and get the actual number. So if I save this, refresh, now we don't get an error, and it will actually tell us 75% of 100 is 75%. So we can always go in and change variable x, and this is the really cool thing about functions, because we have a bunch of code that does something. Let's say I need to calculate something again underneath here, where I want to change, variable x to maybe variable a. I can actually go in and say that variable a is equal to 10. And the new calc, I can then change the variable x inside new calc to variable a, because now it's going to refer to new calc and say, okay, we have a variable called a inside our parentheses, so it's going to go in and replace variable x in here with variable a, because we did actually decide to do that down here, and now it's going to go looking for variable a up here instead. So if we go ahead and refresh the browser, you guys will see we get, here is 75% of what you wrote, 7.5. So we should probably include like a break in here or something so we can actually see what's going on. So I'm just going to go ahead and echo out a break here. Like so. So now we can actually see the difference here. There we go. So functions is something that we don't, well, it can be a little bit confusing in the beginning. But you just need to know that you can write functions like so, at the very top of your document preferably, so you actually have the function before you start calling it, otherwise you can't actually find the function. But you need to make sure you have the function somewhere where you can, call them. And then you can simply write out, the functions down here or somewhere else on the website. Now, a typical thing to do is to include a document that has all your functions in it, at least, one PHP document with all the functions related to maybe users, and one that's maybe related to, calculations. So you can actually go in and, have some kind of system with your functions inside your website. So this is the basic idea behind functions, and I could get a lot more deep into this. I think we're going to stick with this for now, since this is all we need to know in order to create something like a login system. So for now, we're just going to go ahead and stick with this. And then later on, when we do actually get to the more complicated stuff, we'll actually get more, in depth into functions. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time.